All right, so today we are going to talk about direct selling, and I'm going to talk about an important part of direct selling, direct sales, which is professional selling, which we are a professional selling school or department. So we focus a lot on professional sales. And if I can get the PowerPoint to work, we'll slideshow. So I'm going to talk about professional selling. I'm going to talk about some of the techniques in professional selling and what will make you successful in professional selling. One of the things that I try to focus on in this class is how to make this applicable, not just to a business, but to yourself. And so one of the things that I want to talk about in professional sales today is the social styles. And this is important as you go out into the job market and you interview for jobs, to be able to recognize and pick up on an individual's social style so that you can then communicate with them more effectively. A lot of times what happens in professional selling, and one of the reasons that we're not successful, is that we don't necessarily pick up on and engage the consumer or the purchaser in a way that matches what they're going to be receptive to. And understanding social styles is a big part of that. So of all of the forms of integrated marketing communication that we talk about, so we talked about newspapers, magazines, television, radio, and we're going to talk about the internet next after we talk about professional sales. This lecture will last 2 courses probably, today, and then next Tuesday we'll talk about Amy J. Cuddy's power posing. And then we'll probably spend half of the time getting into promotion and other types of direct sales. One of the things that we find is that we don't necessarily approach people in a way that they're most receptive. And so social styles helps us understand how to engage a prospect in a manner that is going to be most conducive to them being receptive to the message that you're giving. And then I'm going to combine this with a discussion on the vowels system. So social styles will tell us how to communicate with an individual, and then the vowels system and typologies will tell us what those individuals are likely to be interested in. So social styles, it's not as in-depth as personality. So personality is one of those things that's been studied a lot in psychology, and they have come up with very sophisticated instruments to assess personality and various types of psychoses. And those are usually measured by something called the MMPI. You can take a social styles test, you can find them online and take them. It's a very short test. The MMPI, on the other hand, is a very long test. It consists of several different scales, hundreds of questions that you respond to, and it's been tested in huge populations and has been shown to be very, very scientifically sound, according to psychiatrists and psychologists who use the MMPI. That's not what social styles is. And social styles are far more stripped down than the personality, which was largely developed, the ideas of personality, by Carl Jung. So it's not about personality, it's about communication, and it's a much shorter instrument that you will take. And you can just Google social styles and you'll come up with the test, and you can see which is yours. It's a 2x2 matrix for social styles. So one is on the vertical axis, the degree of responsiveness that an individual exhibits. So are they highly responsive, or are they more rigid? So it's a degree of responsiveness on the vertical axis. On the horizontal axis, it's degrees of assertiveness. This gives us 4 squares, and it's a continuum. When we think about these things, you're somewhere along the continuum. It's not necessarily, or a spectrum. It's not that you're hard and fast in one You can have people that are, you know, sort of in the middle. And what we find is that people oftentimes have a dominant social style, but they also have a secondary or a fallback social style. So the four types that we'll talk about are analytical. So they are low responsive, high assertive. So they're not responsive to external pressure, and they're low assertive. So low responsive, low assertive. I think I said that backwards. I think I said I was low responsive and high assertive. It's low and low assertiveness. So analyticals tend to be serious. They tend to think things over. They're persistent and they ask a lot of questions. So one of the things that I do is I ask, what do you think in terms of, this is something that everybody can relate to, in terms of what kind of restaurant these people would like. And I've only got one student in class, so I won't put you on the spot, but if you want to answer, you can tell me, which restaurant do you think an analytical would like? So there are lots of different types of restaurants, right? Stemming from fast food to highly, you know, localized. There's a restaurant down on Automobile Alley called Cultivar, which focuses on locally sourced products. So generally speaking, with regard to analyticals, I think that they're going to be interested in a menu that provides a lot of ability to focus on what it is that you're actually getting, information in terms of calorie counts and things like that. And so I think that a restaurant that would appeal to an analytical, although it may lead to what we call analysis paralysis, would be something like the Cheesecake Factory. If you've ever been to a Cheesecake Factory, there's lots of choices. They describe the choices in great detail. They provide a lot of information about the calorie counts that the dishes have. And so I think that would appeal to an analytical because it provides them with the opportunity to focus on kind of what you know, they can analyze and think about, you know, what it is that they have in terms of their needs at the moment. So it allows them a lot of choices. It allows them a lot of opportunity to think and to explore. They can ask questions, and so I think that's a typical restaurant. So if you're just joining, you just walked in, make sure this is still on. Yeah, my live stream is still streaming because I've got people out there that are watching it. What we're doing is we're talking about social styles because we're talking about direct marketing today. And the biggest form of direct marketing is, of course, professional selling. Now, there are other forms that we'll talk about probably next time. So this will be a two-part series on direct selling, and we're talking about social styles. And so one of the things that I ask students to do in other classes, particularly my principles of marketing class, is focus on what you think the typical consumer who has these types of social styles would like in terms of restaurants, because I think that's something we can all relate to. We've all gone out to eat, and it's something that we can think about. There's lots of different restaurants out there, and Oklahoma City has actually a lot of really good choices in terms of restaurants. Anything that you can get in New York City, I say to people when they question why it was that I wanted to come back to Oklahoma, you can get in Oklahoma. I mean, we have really good sushi. We have really fine, even now, vegan restaurants in Oklahoma City. So we have a lot of choices. The second social style that we'll talk about is amiable. So amiables are high responsive, so they're very forward, and they're low on assertiveness. They tend to be loyal, personable, patient, and very uncomfortable with risk. So amiables are individuals who, this is in terms of selling and in terms of IMC, integrated marketing communication, these are the easiest to make an appeal to because they're not going to be likely to say no. They are going to be, as the label suggests, amiable. So they tend to be loyal. They tend to be very brand loyal. So that's one thing that if you can establish a relationship with them, if they can make a connection to a brand, they tend to be extremely brand loyal and patient and personable. So anybody have an idea about what kind of they're uncomfortable with risk, what kind of restaurant amiables would like?
Chili's,
Chili's. Why do you say Chili's?
because there's a lot of them.
Okay.
It's gonna be the same menu.
It's the same menu. It's well established. It's low risk. You know what you're going to get. It's going to be, you know, a known quantity. It's going to be the same. One of the things that has made historically McDonald's very successful was they were fast, cheap, and consistent, right? They're just fast, cheap, consistent food. And that's one of the things that when we're traveling, for example, we like. If we're in a hurry and we're you know going cross country, we don't want to have to think too much. You know what it is. A Big Mac in Oklahoma City is going to taste like a Big Mac in New York. And so Chili's is kind of the same way. It's more than McDonald's, but you know what you're going to get. They have sort of the standard menu across the nation, and it's going to be very, very low risk in terms of what kind of food you're going to get. Whereas if you go to someplace local, it may be, you know, historically going cross country, if you went to the local diner, it could be exceedingly wonderful or exceedingly bad. I remember we were coming back from Kansas City one time. When my brother and I graduated from law school, my mother wanted to do a trip, and she said, "This is probably going to be the last time I'll get both of you because you're going out, you're going to become lawyers together at the same time. So before you become, you know, engaged in your profession and you don't have time," she wanted to do one big road trip. So we went to Kansas City and we had a great time. And it was in the late fall, like end of November, early December, and we were coming back and it started to snow, and it just started like this blizzard came in, and we stopped off. My brother had to use the restroom in this town. It was a Sunday afternoon that we were coming back, and we stopped in Joplin, Missouri. There was almost nothing open at that point in time. Actually, you know, people took Sundays off, and there weren't a lot of stores that were open. McDonald's was open, and obviously, like Walmart's were open, but you know, a lot of the local restaurants were not on Sundays. And so there was this one, and it was snowing, the snowstorm, and so a lot of businesses had decided to close. And we go into this little diner, and my mother is like this rabid anti-smoker. And at the time, you could still smoke in most restaurants in places like Oklahoma and Missouri. And from the moment we walked through the door until the time we left, it was a negative sell. So my mother goes, we walk in, and there's, you know, like a table of men that are all having coffee at this diner, and they're all smoking heavily, like one right after the other. And my mom is like, "Oh my God, there's smoking in here." And I'm like, we've passed 5 restaurants that are closed. Ral has used the bathroom. We're eating here. We're hungry. We're starving. This is where we're eating. And so the waitress comes running over, she's acting as the hostess because everybody's called in. And she's like, "I'm not going to lie to you. If you're sensitive to smoke, we have a non-smoking section, but it wafts. You can't control it. It just wafts around in here. So you might as well, you know, not stay if that's going to be a problem." And I'm like, obviously my curiosity is now piqued. So we decided we're going to stay, and we sit down, and my mother's like, "Well, at least this is like a country diner. It's probably got really good home cooked food. I think I'll try the meatloaf." And the waitress says, "Well, it ain't your mama's meatloaf, and it ain't my meatloaf either." And my mother says, "What do you mean?" She says, "Well, when you see people doing this, they're looking for some taste, and there ain't no taste in that meatloaf." And the whole thing was a negative sell. And the reason I point this out is that, I mean, like every single thing that we went down the menu, she had something negative to say until I said, "I think I'll just have a grilled cheese." And she's like, "Oh, that's good." he can't, and then she used an expletive to describe the grilled cheese. She's like, he can't, that up. And it was just hysterical. Like, okay, grilled cheese, I mean, like, you can't really, that is hard to screw up, a grilled cheese sandwich. And it was just like that through the whole thing. I mean, when we got to dessert, my mother was like, well, they probably, and she's like, nope, don't make the dessert. It comes right from Sam's. It was through the whole course of the meal, and it just became funnier and funnier and funnier. And the reason that that's, sort of relevant is that if you are one of these people who likes to experiment with food, which I am, that's the risk you take when you go to local restaurants. It can be really, really good, or it can be really, really bad. If you're uncomfortable with risk, which amiables generally are, like you said, Chili's is going to be what you're going to get. It's going to be the same across the country. McDonald's is going to be the same across the country, whereas the local diner or, the locally sourced restaurant is not. Drivers, this is what I am. Low, responsive, very assertive. I am very assertive. They're task-oriented. They prefer clearly defined goals. So they want you to, if you are a driver's boss, they want you to tell them what it is that you want them to achieve. They are committed and they are risk takers. So they're very task oriented, clearly defined goals, but they are willing to take risks. And that's what I am. I'm a driver. I have a tendency to talk, not to listen, which is one of the reasons that I went into this profession, because it's the one profession where you get to talk a lot and other people have to listen to you. So, high assertiveness, low responsiveness, task-oriented, very committed. Once drivers make a decision, they have a tendency to stick to that decision. They become, committed to that decision. If you think about the previous administration in terms of politics, so I teach political marketing as well. And in that course, IMC is, of course, one of the major topics that we talk about because politicians have to get elected, right? The voter is in the political marketplace, the consumer. One of the things that a lot of people liked about Donald Trump was he was absolutely sure that he was right. I alone can fix it. That's what he said. I alone can fix this. And he was very committed to his positions. And that's a driver. He's clearly, I'm going to build this building. I'm going to develop this golf course. Very committed. What kind of restaurants do you think drivers would be interested in? Oh, I forgot to give you a duck for coming up with Chili's. Let me give you.
What is your favorite restaurant?
What's my favorite restaurant?
You're a driver.
I'm a driver. What's my favorite restaurant? I like a lot of different restaurants. So I like sushi, for example. I like things that are efficient, that are fast, that are going to be really good quality. So, for example, for sushi, I like Sushi Nico on Western. That's one of my favorite places. I mean, they're very good. They're very consistent in their quality of their food. I think that's great, and they're they have a good wait staff. So that's one of my favorites is Sushi Nico. I also like right across the street is Musashi's if you want hibachi. I like hibachi, and so I think that's entertaining. Musashi's is another one. Drivers are probably the hardest one to come up with a restaurant on because it's largely going to be very dependent on their individual taste. Whereas amiables, you can, low risk, you can come up with things like Chili's. McDonald's, they're going to like McDonald's because it's low risk. If you're traveling, it's one of the things that you can go. They have good restaurants, good restrooms, not good restaurants. They have good restrooms. They're always clean, and you're assured of the same thing. So high assertiveness, high responsiveness are expressives. Expressives are enormously people oriented. Drivers are into telling. Expressives are high and high. They like to be around people. They are willing to listen to them, but they do like to be the center of attention. They can be incredibly emotional, talkative, and dramatic. They're highly theatrical. They are good storytellers. So what kind of restaurant do you think that an expressive would like?
There's a restaurant called Karen Restaurant.
Uh-huh.
That's like people working there really rude with you and they talking with the bad word and stuff. And this is time for them to shove you and you
Okay.
leave. But so is it the one of it?
Okay, they are actually, there used to be a restaurant in Oklahoma City. You all are way too young. When I first started teaching, everybody remembers this restaurant. It was called, Molly Murphy's House of Fine Repute, and it was on Western Avenue towards the airport, right north, or right, I'm sorry, right south of I-40. And they were like that. It was the waiters all dressed up in costumes. So they were like Superman or Spider-Man, or, this one waitress that we had one time was like Little Bo Peep, and they were exceedingly obnoxious. But they were very theatrical, and it was really good, but it was kind of offbeat. And I think that would have appealed to expressive. So this restaurant that you're talking about, it's kind of similar to that. And they would, like, if you said, where's the restroom? They would parade you around the restaurant, telling everybody that you needed to go to the restroom. And it was kind of a big joke. So this restaurant what's it called? You said Karen?
Karen? Yeah, they serve you really rude.
Okay,
Like
all right.
they dress up and like serve you with the bad word and stuff.
This is, so the title or the designation of a Karen has actually changed. They used to be called Becky's. That was this entitled person who was sort of rude. So I take it that that's what the restaurant is like. They're entitled people who are rude and pushy and willing to call the police on people. So yeah, that might be interesting. That might be something that would appeal to an expressive, because it's going to be a theatrical performance. It's going to be something that is, unique. It allows them to be dramatic, talkative and emotional, particularly if you've got this, sort of person that's combative with you. So I think that might be one. Because they're creative, I think that you could find restaurants that expressives like that are highly creative, like Lou Divine in Oklahoma City would be another one, where it's locally sourced. The menu is very unique, and so it allows you to, sort of expand your repertoire. And I think expressives would like that. They would like to try different things because they are so creative in their outlook on life. So now we're going to talk about vowels, and we're going to combine. So those are the 4 social styles. So we have driver, amiable, analytical, expressive, and we're going to combine those with the vowels typology. And what vowels does is it comes up with a matrix that's based on whether or not you have high access to resources or low access to resources, and then what your motivation is. So you can take this test as well. You can go to strategicbusinessinsights.com and you can take the vowels test, and it's interesting to see what types my students are. I will tell you that overwhelmingly, students at UCO tend to be strivers because they want a better life. When my students have done this in the past and shared it with me. So at the top, and let's see, I gotta switch screens here. At the top, with high access to resources, are innovators, and they are driven by a multitude of different things. And so they don't fit neatly into one of these categories. So the categories are whether or not you have high or low access to resources. So below this are people that have low access to resources versus high access to resources. And then are you motivated by ideas? Are you motivated by achievement, or are you motivated by self-expression? And there are two that fall outside. So this is a 2x3 matrix, depending on whether or not you have high access to low or low access, and then what motivates you. But there are two that fall outside of the matrix, and those are innovators and survivors. So high access to resources, innovators, and they tend to be motivated by a lot of different things. So innovators are very attentive to information. They're constantly taking in information. These are the people that when you go out to dinner with them, your friends, they're, you know, the minute somebody says something, they're Googling it to see if that's correct because they're suspicious of everything. My friend Robert is constantly doing this. I'll say something and he's like constantly fact checking me to see if I'm correct. And I'm like, you know, I don't just make things up off the top of my head, Robert. They're confident in their decision making, and they're willing to experiment. So they're willing to try new things. One of the things that we know, and this is an exception to one of the rules, is that the older you get, the less willing you are to try things. So for example, they use this example of sushi. If you've never tried sushi by the time you're 45, the chances are you're not going to try it. It's just not going to be something that you try. That's not true with innovators. They will, even in later life, they're willing to try new things, and they have lots of money, and so they're willing to do that. They are skeptical about advertising. So from an integrated marketing communication standpoint, they are not going to be persuaded by ads that they see on television. They're going to believe that these are, you know, not legitimate sources of information. They have an international perspective in many instances. There are a growing number of people across the world who identify less and less with a nationality, and they consider themselves to be more global citizens. People like Bill Gates. He is not at all, I mean, he is an American, but, you know, I mean, his focus in terms of his philanthropy and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is very international. It's focused on problems that cross borders, and his interest in these things that are not necessarily confined to a one nation perspective. I mean, there are things that are unique and challenges that are unique to the United States that you don't necessarily find in other countries. So for example, if you think about Western Europe, those countries, a lot of them border more than two countries. The United States, for the most part, has two nations that it borders, which means that we have, you know, far more geographic stability than they have, for example, in Western or even Eastern Europe, which has experienced, you know, lots of border disputes. One of the things that's happening in Ukraine now is that is a border dispute. The Russians sort of say, well, you know, there's this area, and they took over it, of people that are primarily ethnic Russians and speak Russian. And so, you know, that should be part of our territory. And now they're claiming that the whole thing should be part of their territory. these people have that kind of international perspective. Bill Gates is worried about things like HIV/AIDS, which crosses, national boundaries. The United States, for the most part, after we went to war with Mexico and signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, we haven't had a border dispute with them. We haven't had a border dispute with Canada since, like the War of 1812 or something like that. I mean, it's been a fairly stable geographic boundary. That's not necessarily true in other parts of the world. So these people are concerned about those things. They're concerned not just about their own country. Bill and Melinda Gates are concerned about these issues that transcend national boundaries. They're very future oriented. So they are looking towards the future and what is the next new thing. In terms of technology, for example, these people are going to be very interested in things like artificial intelligence and its ability to impact both negatively and positively the world around us. So my sister-in-law is getting a PhD in management from the University of North Texas, which is in Denton. They have campuses now in Dallas as well. They've expanded, but she's getting this PhD in management. And one of the things that they're looking at, and one of the things that she's studying, is ChatGPT and how that can be used by academics to find sources of information and find and conduct research. So we're really concerned at UCO and some other institutions about the negative impacts that artificial intelligence can have on our, product, the work product that we're having. They're looking at how can we use this in a positive way to develop, for example, the literature review that is required in academic writing. So what you do when you conduct an academic study and you publish an academic paper is you generally go and you look at what's been done before, right? And then you try and find gaps in that literature and see if you can contribute in a meaningful way. Well, they're looking at ChatGPT as a way to go and identify the relevant literature that's out there and then make it easier for students to identify these sort of gaps in the literature. And so that's a very innovative way of thinking, rather than just assuming that this is going to be a big challenge that we have to deal with in higher education, which is how do we ensure that what you are doing is the product of your own sort of, thinking and ideology. How are we going to do that? So one of the ways, historically that I've done and gotten around these issues of plagiarism is I have developed essays that are, in every exam in my marketing ethics and upper division, not so much in the principles class, that are changed every semester and that are unique to the context and that would be difficult to plagiarize because it's a unique problem every single semester. Well, now with artificial intelligence, in theory, you could stick this into a ChatGPT type thing, and you could come up with content that would answer those questions, right? So how do we deal with that? An innovator is going to look at that and say, this is really cool. How can I use this to become better? In my business, for example, how can I use ChatGPT to reach consumers in a more creative way that's going to appeal to various types of groups that are going to be interested in what it is that I'm selling? So thinking about my own business, how can I use it to sell bed and breakfast, to spin a story or something that we can put out in an ad? That would be an interesting way of using it. They're self-directed consumers. So innovators are self-directed. They're going to find the stuff that they want. They're not going to rely on advertising. They believe in science. and the fact that research and development are credible. I shouldn't have to say this, but we have a huge percentage of the population that is becoming very skeptical of science. One of the things that we saw, and this is becoming political, historically speaking, scientific thinking was not necessarily questioned in the past. If you went back to the 1950s, one of the things that we found during that time period was that people really, and this is one of the reasons why I tell students, whether or not you have read Nietzsche, you are in the patrimony of Nietzsche. If a doctor said something to you, you didn't necessarily question it in the 1950s. Doctor knows best. They're the ones that have gone to school, they've gotten this advanced degree. We now find people questioning everything, right? And it's become highly political. If you are, a sort of supporter of the previous president, this idea of getting vaccinated and wearing masks and stuff like that, I mean, people were pretty adamant. They were showing up with T-shirts in places that said, "Your paranoia is not going to impact my freedoms." The idea that I'm not going to be forced to wear a mask. So these people, innovators, tend to think that science is a legitimate source of information. Now, it's not that they don't question. You can find various studies, but they're going to not necessarily be skeptical of experts. They're the most receptive to new ideas and technologies, and they enjoy problem solving, and they have a wide variety of interests and activities. So they're not just going to be motivated by one thing. They're going to be these kinds of people that are willing to try lots of different things. We went through the USCA site visit to become full members, and the guy who came out and did the site visit stayed at my bed and breakfast, and I fixed, a lot of different food for him every morning for breakfast that he was here, which was 3 days, and we had a dinner for him with the faculty. And he was fascinated by the amount of food and the variety of food that I cooked, which I was complimented. He told one of the other USCA members when I was down there in Dallas this last week for our meeting about all of the food and I was like, he didn't mention the airplane. And she's like, "What airplane?" And I'm like, he didn't mention the fact that I picked him up in Oklahoma City at Will Rogers World Airport in my airplane. And she's like, "No, he didn't mention that at all." I mean, he is not an innovator, he's a thinker. And he was much more interested in sort of those traditional pursuits. Whereas Andrea was like, "Oh my God, I would have loved that. I wish I had been the one that had come and done your site visit," because she's like, I just went skydiving, 2 weeks ago with my daughter, and she's willing to try that. She's interested in that and a lot of other things. Whereas Scott, obviously, this is not an experience that most people get to have, other than at an air show or something like that. So they enjoy a variety of interests. They're going to be the ones that are out there willing to go hiking, but also, enjoy learning about new computer applications and new apps. They're willing to try things. They're willing to experiment in cell phone technology, whereas others that have high access to resources may be more interested in the functionality of that. So what kind of restaurant do you think would be appealing in the Oklahoma City market to an innovator? And then what type of social style do you think most innovators are going to be? There are no right or wrong answers here. I'm just wanting to see what you guys think. Let's start with social styles. So you've got 4 social styles. You've got driver, amiable, expressive, Which-
be.
I think a lot of innovators are drivers. Most of these people, because they have high access to resources, a lot of these people are like, now, I mean, there's sort of a mythology around a lot of the wealthy people in this country. And one of the mythologies is that I can be Bill Gates, right? You know, I mean, like, if he can do it, anybody can do it. He wasn't a poor kid, right? I mean, this is not a kid that grew up in a poor household, but he has certainly achieved an enormous amount in his lifetime. So there is this mythology in the United States that anyone can be rich, that it's just a matter of hard work and determination and you can be rich. And I don't think that's necessarily true. People who have achieved a lot of success, you know, I mean, people point to Bill Gates, they point to Warren Buffett, and they're like, he was, you know, an average man, and he achieved, at one point in time, Warren Buffett was the wealthiest man in the world. He's the chairman and CEO of Berkshire Hathaway. Berkshire Hathaway is perhaps one of the most successful investment firms in the nation. And let's look at what just out of curiosity, what a Class A share of Berkshire is worth today. What's the stock price today? Congressman, even though his father wasn't excessively wealthy, that kind of background gives you access to a lot of people, right? Now, Warren has obviously turned that into something, but you know, he's probably a driver. I mean, he's done things in terms of his raising of his children that you might find, you know, to be sort of horrific. He motivated his children through money. He noticed his daughter was getting a little chunky, and he's like, "I'll give you." I think the story was something like $1 million if you lose weight. You know, that's a kind of a typical driver maneuver. And so, yeah, I think you're going to find a lot of these people that are drivers. Which one do you think they'd least likely to be of the social styles? You've got amiable, expressive, driver, right? Which one do you think is the least likely? I think it's amiable, because amiables, you know, are not necessarily high power. They're willing to go along and get along and go with the group. Innovators are not going to go. I mean, they don't care what you think. They're, just by virtue of the fact that they are willing to try all these different things and that they tend to be, you know, successful in business, they're probably not going to be a lot of amiables. Not saying that there aren't. Again, one of the things that you have to think about when we talk about this is you can't apply characteristics of the aggregate to the individual or characteristics of the individual to the aggregate, right? That's a logical fallacy. But by and large, on the whole, I don't think you're going to find a lot of innovators that are amiable. So what kind of restaurants do you think that they'd be like, you know, in Oklahoma City?
There's one that's called Nashbird that don't
Okay.
do like a whole lot of advertising. I've only ever heard anything about like word of mouth from them.
Okay.
But it's like a cult-like following by everybody that I know that likes it.
All right. And so it's not something that everybody's gonna like, and that's gonna appeal to innovators because it's different and that's just not the same, right? I think they're gonna be attracted to a lot of new restaurants. One of the things that happens in the restaurant industry is it is very dynamic, and restaurants come and go, right? A lot of them, what's popular today, people are willing to try. I think innovators are willing to try new restaurants, and a lot of those restaurants, you know, some of them will stay and some of them won't. So I think, you know, a lot of them tend to be drivers. They tend to go for the interesting, the novel, the new. When it first opened, at the top of the Devon Tower was a restaurant called Vast. I think that when that opened, that would be appealing to innovators. It's a new place. It's, you know, got this incredible views that you can see, you know, for miles and miles and miles. And so I think that would be something that they would like. So thinkers have high access to resources. They tend to focus on the normative. And what I mean by the normative is they tend to be highly motivated by societal norms. Thinkers tend to be people that are, you know, the pillars of the community in small towns. They are the local leaders in many instances. So they think about the ought. What is they're interested in traditional pursuits like history, and they tend to be highly educated. They tend to plan. They're not ones that tend to go. So my mother and I, when we traveled, when we used to go see my brother, he lived in New York. And because, you know, I was a college professor, I have all this time off in the summers, we would just go. We never made a reservation on our drive up there, and we would always take a full week. You can actually get from here to New York City in 2 days of solid driving. We would never do it in 2 days. We would always take a week, and we would go off and find different things. And we would never stay at the same place twice. We would go to different hotels and try different things. Thinkers tend to, they're not gonna leave it to chance. And a couple of times I will tell you that this, you know, just leaving it to chance turned out poorly in that we would stop someplace and we were just absolutely exhausted, and everything in town would be booked because it would be the town's whatever festival by just happenstance. You know, like there were 2 times where just every single thing was booked, and you know, we had to travel another, you know, 75 when you're tired, 75 to 100 miles in order to find someplace that we could stay. And so it didn't always work out. Thinkers are going to be ones that they're going to plan, they're going to research, they're going to choose the route, they're going to have all of the activities that they're going to do sort of lined out along the way. They like history, they enjoy a historical perspective, so they enjoy learning about history. When they go on vacation, they have a tendency to do things like visit Civil War battlefields and learn about the history, or the Revolutionary War. If you go to New York, you can find a lot of places. My brother lived in Saratoga Springs, that a major battle in the Revolutionary War was the Battle of Saratoga. And so they like that. They're very financially established. This group, you know, in many respects are baby boomers who are now retiring. They're established. They're over 65. They have, you know, their 401k that they've invested in, and they're pretty secure in their retirement. They are not at all influenced by fads. So again, if I think about sort of my history in terms of the way Oklahoma City has developed, I was vice mayor in Guthrie when they opened. This was in 2000, around 2000, when they opened the canal in Bricktown. And that was the, you know, and as I was a member of the Association of Central Oklahoma Governments, and so I was invited as a member of that association to go and be part of the opening festivities of the canal. And I came back to Guthrie and I said, you know, we really need to step up our game, because Guthrie was this little unique community on the north edge of the Oklahoma City Metro. And a lot of people came to Guthrie because it was historic and it was unique, and it would appeal to people like thinkers, right? But all of a sudden you now have this warehouse district in Bricktown that has opened up, and they've got this river walk that they had built that was larger than the San Antonio River Walk. And it had all kinds of restaurants that were going in and all kinds of neat places. And it was definitely the place where innovators at that time went, and young people would flock to Bricktown. It was the major sort of entertainment district. Your generation now, I can tell you, when you go to Bricktown, I see less of you all down there than I did when it opened. I mean, it was very young, it was very hip, it was very sort of, you know, where everybody wanted to be. That's changed. So where do you guys like to go now in terms of places that you think are hot and, you know, hip and wonderful?
There's a lot to do on Memorial.
Okay.
Top Golf is up
Yeah,
there.
there's like Top Golf, and there's now some new restaurants that have opened up. That used to be, when I was a kid, again, growing up, that was a very hot area because that was where the newest mall was. Malls are very passé among your generation. Nobody goes to like my generation, we all went to the mall. That was a big thing to go to the mall and like hang out, walk around, and, you know, eat in the food court. A lot of your generation are showing up at places like the Plaza District, Paseo, things like that, that are emerging districts. They're not necessarily, you know, what sort of, among your generation, one of the things that we know from research is that you're more interested in authentic experiences. And Bricktown was really cool at the time, but it's kind of like Disneyland. It's not really an authentic experience. It's an artificial experience that they have created down there. Like the Riverwalk in San Antonio was created as a way of managing flood control in the city, right? So it didn't start out as this, and then they're like, well, you've got water and you've got this ability to walk. So it became popular. Ours, that's not at all what the canal was in Oklahoma City. It's completely artificially constructed. And it's a completely artificial experience. So thinkers like this historical perspective, they're going to be interested in places like Guthrie because it's got a lot of history. We've got the world's largest Masonic temple. What kinds of restaurants do you think thinkers are going to be attracted to?
I think it's sort of like you said with the drivers earlier, where it's more so just like a personal preference, and they're not gonna like go to a certain restaurant just because it's popular.
Right. They're not just going to go because, so they're going to look for things that are good quality. I think that are in Oklahoma City, in the Oklahoma City area. One of the things that I think used to be, it's now gone. It's no longer open. There used to be 2 restaurants in Oklahoma City that were very, very famous, never advertised ever. One was called the Coach House. It was, I think, the only mobile 4-star restaurant in Oklahoma City. And it's in Nichols Hills Plaza. And it was a very sort of fine dining establishment. And I think that's what a thinker is going to be attracted to. One that is still open that I think would be interesting, or that thinkers would think about. Again, not one that caters to, you know, like new and novel and stuff like that. What is it? I've lost the name of it. It's on, I can picture it. It's over there in that area. It's not in Nichols Hills Plaza, but let's see if I can, it'll come to me in a minute. But it's one that's been there forever and ever and ever. It's got really good quality food. It's not necessarily experimental food, but it's just really good in terms of it's all made there. I mean, one of the things that you find with things like Chili's now is that Chili's, a lot of it is just prepackaged Cisco food that they, open and put on a plate. That's certainly not what the Coach House was. It's the Metro. The Metro is the other one, and it's over there in Nichols Hills, and it's a very well-established sort of place that people went in Oklahoma City forever. You find a lot of people from Nichols Hills that are gonna like this historical perspective. Another one that used to be very popular that would have appealed to thinkers that's no longer in business was a place called the Haunted House. It was in Northwest Oklahoma City. It was out in the country. Again, they never advertised. You had to be aware of it in order to go. They required a coat and tie. It was one of the few places in Oklahoma City that required that they had a dress code. That used to be a thing. There used to be dress codes at places. I know that your generation can't understand that if I have to wear a coat and tie, I'm not going to go. But I think that's one of the things that they would have liked. So low access to resources, but motivated by ideals. So thinkers are motivated by ideas. That's why they like history, because they view this as, like history is the past is prologue for them in many instances. And that is true. I mean, one of the things that we see is that people have a tendency to repeat historical phenomenon. One of the things that we're seeing, that if you've studied history at all, and one of the things that you should know if you've studied history, is that this never works, and it's really not going to work in the modern era. But historically, we have seen book bans throughout history. We've seen the Holy Roman Catholic Church, when it was the dominant force, have a list of books that were banned. And one of the things that would happen as a result of that made them very difficult, is that once you start banning things, people become interested in them, and then they seek them out. In the past, that was harder to do because books were sort of precious and they were limited, and you didn't, necessarily have a lot of access to them unless you were a wealthy individual. But in the age of the internet, we're seeing this again. We're seeing lots of states, Texas, for example, trying to ban books. And what you're really doing when you put those, like kids today, you all have these devices right in front of you. You put it on a book ban and you pull it out of the library. I mean, this is the craziest thing to me. Do kids actually go to a library? Do you actually go? When I was an undergraduate, to do research papers, you actually had to go to the library and you looked at articles, and they were on microfilm or microfiche, and you'd put them in this machine and you would read them, and then you'd actually have to go to, they charge 10 cents a copy, so you'd have these rolls of dimes that you'd sit there and feed into a machine and make copies of what it is you needed for your research. You all don't do that. Like, you may go to the library to do some research online, right, and look at the article database for various classes, but you're not actually going over there. And so, they're pulling these books off the shelves, and I'm just like, come on, people. Like, the minute you start doing this, now the kids are on their phone Googling it and looking up, what it is. But this historical perspective, like, thinkers are gonna think about why that's a bad idea to do these kinds of things. Believers, on the other hand, have low access. Let's see if I switch to resources, but they are motivated by these ideas, right? Generally, these ideas are formed in places like churches for believers. So they believe in right and wrong. They believe in listening to the minister and coming up with, what's right and what's wrong, and that following those kinds of things lead to the good life. They rely on spirituality and faith as their motivation. So they're motivated by ideals. Thinkers are going to be motivated by things like science and things like history, whereas believers are going to be motivated by the Bible, right? ran into a woman. We were taking a whole bunch of my friend's books to be donated. We took them to Goodwill because it was still open. This was during COVID. And the Friends of the Library in Oklahoma City had closed down. They just were not doing it, but Goodwill was still open. So we took this stuff to Goodwill, and we were telling this woman, like, if you want, like, she's, like elderly, this woman who was volunteering at Goodwill. And we said, like, if you want any of these books before we drop them off in here, to help yourself. And she's like, I'm not much of a reader, but if I read, it's my Bible. And that's what these people are gonna be motivated by, right? Like they go to church faithfully, they rely on faith and spirituality as their ideas. They like friendly communities. They watch TV and read romance novels as their forms of entertainment. They want to know where things stand, and they have no tolerance for ambiguity. They are not looking for societal change. They resist societal change. These people find advertising as a legitimate source of information. So these people are going to watch a lot of television, and they are going to watch the ads, and they're going to view that as a legitimate source of information. They're going to be, the infomercials late at night. They'll look at that. They value consistency and stability. And they have a real need to maintain the status quo in communities. So they like friendly communities. When I was growing up in Oklahoma, when we moved here in 1986, I was 13. We moved to Guthrie. Sunday was church day. I mean, if you didn't go to church, people looked at you funny. Wednesday, when I moved here, it was the craziest thing to me. They couldn't give homework in the Guthrie Public Schools. There was a rule that said you could not assign homework on Wednesday nights because that was church night. Wednesday was the Baptist churches in town all had a fellowship and prayer or something on, so they couldn't assign homework. That's the kind of thing that these people like. So what kinds of restaurants do you think they're going to be attracted to? And what kind of social style do you think these people are going to be? So look at this. They want friendly communities.
Expressive.
Okay, you think expressive? I'm not going to disagree, but I think amiable.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of these people that are amiables because they want friendly communities, right? They want the status quo. They're not risk takers. What kind of restaurant do you think they're going to be attracted to?
I get a lot of people like this at the restaurant I work at on Sundays.
Where do you work on Sundays?
Pub W.
Pub W.
Yeah. I work
Okay.
there other days. Mostly on Sundays is when they come in.
Okay. So you work with Wyatt? Is
I
that
do, yeah.
okay? And you only work there on Sundays? That's the
No,
only.
I work there other days of the week.
Oh,
It's
okay.
just, I see them more often on Sundays.
Okay.
A lot of the time it's right after church and they're feeling good.
Right. And Pub W has, like sort of a very local like menu that would appeal, they've got
Yes.
meatloaf, for example, on the menu the last time I was there, right? They have taken the burnt ends off the menu, which I'm highly upset about.
Yeah, most people are.
Most people are upset that the
Yeah.
burnt ends are been taken off the meat, but burnt ends are like, the way they do them at Pub W is somewhat unique, but that's kind of a staple in barbecue. I mean, that's one of the things that you'll find in a lot of barbecue restaurants, which are gonna be really popular in places like Oklahoma, and you're gonna find a lot of that. So they're gonna like barbecue, they're gonna like chicken fried steak, that kind of, what I know, comfort food, right? No ambiguity. I know what I'm gonna get if I go into the stables in Guthrie, for example. If you've ever eaten there, it's barbecue. They have, it's hamburgers and barbecue, and it's mashed potatoes and gravy. There's nothing that you would call inspired food in there, but it's just good comfort food, right? So they're gonna like that. So I'll give you another duck. I think those are, you know, all places that they're gonna be interested in. Achievers, so high access, moving back to high access to resources. Achievers are oftentimes first generation college graduates. They have a me first, my family first attitude. They believe that money is a source of authority. So everyone in Edmond, right, like the land of the shallow and pretentious, has a tendency, Edmond, by and large, on the whole, has a high per capita income. They have a high percentage of people who have college degrees, and not only college degrees, but a high percentage of people who have professional degrees. So what are professional degrees? The Juris Doctorate, so lawyers, and the medical doctorate, MDs, right? And accountants, CPAs. So they believe that money is a source of authority. They are committed to their family and their job. They have a tendency to have full schedules. These are the people that, you know, are constantly running from activity to activity, particularly with their children. They overbook their kids. They're, you know, we've got the kids that are in soccer and basketball. I don't know that my brother is an achiever, but I mean, he certainly has some characteristics of an achiever. He's got these two kids, and those kids are involved in every single activity. My nephew plays lacrosse and soccer and basketball. Now he's running track this year. He's sort of decided that basketball is his primary thing, and that's where he devotes most of his attention. But he's done all these other things. He's tried them, and he's constantly going to a game. When I go down there, it's like run the kids here, run the kids there. My niece has been involved in gymnastics and soccer and what I now call cheernastics. When I was a kid growing up, cheerleading was, you know, like they went to the football games, they wore these outfits, they you know, were supposed to get the crowd riled up and rooting for the team that they represented, right? So they were on the sidelines, and they sort of did some, you know, like maybe they did the splits, or maybe they did some backflips or things like that. That's not what cheer is now. Cheer is its own sport, and it's highly competitive. So my niece, and I call it, she hates it when I say this, but I call it cheernastics, because it's no longer just about doing some splits and kicking your feet up in the air. This is a highly choreographed, highly athletic activity that they're engaged in. And there are these people, like my niece is what's called a flyer. So she's the one that they throw up in the air, and they, you know, do all kinds of twists and things like that. And so it's a exceedingly difficult athletic, and cheer is no longer about really going and cheering at the level she's doing it. It's not about cheering for your high school. Like this, there are competitions for this. It's one of the things that's kind of odd. The number one team in America in cheer is at a junior college in Corsicana, Texas, called Navarro. And they have an entire like reality TV show that has focused on the success of this program, and the coach at that community college is named Monica Aldaba, and they've won literally. And the other one that wins is a junior college that's right down the road from Navarro, and I can't think of the name, but these are the top two programs in the country. And so they're constantly doing things like this. They're taking their kids to all of these things because, you know, this is the way your kid is going to get ahead. They're going to meet people, they're going to network, they're going to get a scholarship out of this kind of thing. So they're fully scheduled. They're very, very goal oriented. They are enormously driven by, like achievement and making sure that your kid is, they're playing the best and that they're winning stuff. My niece has all of these medals from gymnastics that she's won. They are anchors of the status quo, exceedingly pure conscious. So they are very concerned about what the neighbors are doing. There was a movie about what we might call viral marketing, starring Demi Moore, which was called The Joneses. And the reason it was called The Joneses is because there used to be a saying that you're keeping up with the Joneses. So the idea was the Joneses were the all-American, sort of average American stereotype. And people used to say, oh, they're keeping up with the Joneses. They, if the Joneses got whatever, the rest of the neighborhood would follow. And that's what these people do. In this movie, in The Joneses, Demi Moore and her fake husband and their two fake kids go into communities and they virally market all kinds of stuff. So they give them these cars and these people become sort of opinion leaders. And it turns out in the movie to not be necessarily a great thing, but these people are very pure conscious. So when Tom or Harry has the new golf clubs, when I was a kid growing up, Ping Zings were like the bomb in terms of golf clubs. Everybody went out and got Ping Zings if you were a achiever, right? They're professional. They value technology that provides a functionality. So innovators are willing to try things for the sake of trying it, right? They're willing to try technology just because it's cool and it's new and I want to figure it out. Achievers value technology insofar as it adds something to my life. So I have this device that I'm constantly, and I actually left mine at home today, and I realized it halfway to school, and I started having a panic attack because I don't have my cell phone with me. And God knows, how am I going to know what I'm doing after class if I don't have my cell phone? So I'm going to have to run home and get it. That's what these people, they value the cell phone not because it's the new thing, but because it keeps your schedule for you, right? It allows you to know you've always got this thing, what you're going to do. I'm out of time, so we'll stop there. I will give you your bonus points for participation today, and we will finish this next time and then talk about some other direct marketing techniques like coupons and things like that, some of the more traditional ones.